I first met Kaylin Voss at the flea market beneath the Brooklyn Bridge. That day, I was squatting in front of a pile of vintage cameras, haggling with the vendor, when a deep laugh drifted from behind me, warm, as if soaked in sunlight. Trust me, he sold the same model for only $15 last week. I turned around and caught the lingering smile in his eyes. The man wore a faded indigo work shirt, his cuffs casually rolled up to his forearms, revealing a faint scar on his wrist bone. His khaki pants had frayed knees, and on his feet were a pair of worn Converse, the edges dusted with the distinctive grime of New York City streets. He carried a canvas bag emblazoned with the faded words, Cornell University Library, looking just like countless young scholars struggling in New York, bursting with dissertation dreams but with wallets emptier than their bookshelves. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, raising an eyebrow as I stood up. I smoothly haggled the vendor's $30 asking price down to $15. After the deal, he held out his hand, Kaylin Voss. His palm was warm and dry, his fingertips calloused, as if from constant penholding or handiwork. "Elena Costa," I replied, shaking his hand. I noticed his nails were neatly trimmed, a subtle mismatch with his plain attire. We started seeing each other frequently after that. He said he taught comparative literature at Brooklyn College and did part-time translation work to make ends meet, renting a sixth-floor walk-up in Williamsburg. I visited once. The hallway reeked of pizza grease from the neighboring shop, the room barely big enough for a bed and a desk, its walls plastered with yellowed book pages and black and white movie posters. He brewed the cheapest instant coffee, yet somehow always remembered I hated sugar and cream. When I complained about my apartment's lack of heating, he showed up at our next meeting with a hand-knitted wool blanket, saying it was a family heirloom from his grandmother, too nice to throw away. New York's winters hit early and hard. I worked as an assistant at a design studio in Midtown Manhattan, earning a meager salary and commuting an hour and a half each way by subway. One night, I stayed late overtime, and freezing rain began to fall. I stood shivering outside the office building, my phone dead. Just as I debated braving the rain to the subway station, a black sedan glided to a stop in front of me. The window rolled down, and there sat Kaylin. "What are you doing here?" I asked in surprise, climbing into the warm car. His familiar cedar scent wrapped around me. "Just passing by and saw you standing here," he said, handing me a dry blanket, his gaze casual as if it were a mere coincidence. Wrapped in the blanket, I watched the streetlights blur past and couldn't help but study the car. The interior was understatedly luxurious, the leather seats soft to the touch, the logo cleverly concealed, but I knew instinctively this wasn't an ordinary vehicle. "Did you rent this?" I asked casually. "Borrowed it from a friend," he replied lightly. "He's overseas and asked me to take it out occasionally to keep it running." I didn't press further, but doubts took root in my mind. Once, we met for dim sum in Chinatown when he received a call. His tone was unrecognizable, no longer gentle and relaxed, but authoritative and commanding, as he spoke fluent French. When he hung up and noticed my curious stare, he explained, "Copyright issues with a French novel I translated." I nodded, but recalled he'd never mentioned speaking French before. The more time we spent together, the more such discrepancies emerged. He could rattle off the design philosophy behind my obscure independent designer dress, even knowing the brand's unreleased next collection. The restaurants he recommended always required 3 months advance booking, yet we'd always get the best table. His confidence and expertise when talking about art didn't match a mere literature enthusiast. But whenever I tried to dig deeper, he'd deflect with perfectly plausible excuses, his sincerity making me feel like I was overthinking. In early March, my grandmother fell seriously ill in Boston and needed urgent surgery. I scraped together every penny I had, but was still $30,000 short, leaving me awake at night, frantic with worry. Kaylin sensed my anxiety, and after pressing me repeatedly, I finally told him the truth. He fell silent for a moment, then said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of the money." I assumed he planned to borrow it from friends and hurried to stop him. No, I'll find another way. I don't want to put you out. But he took my hand, his eyes steady. Elena, aren't we friends? The next day, he handed me $30,000 in cash, wrapped in a plain brown envelope. It's all the savings from my translation work and teaching gigs, he said with a smile. I was planning to use it for a bigger apartment, but that can wait. Holding the heavy envelope, I was overcome with gratitude and guilt, tears spilling down my cheeks. I'll pay you back as soon as I can, I choked out. He brushed away my tears, his touch gentle. Silly girl, you don't have to be so formal with me. My grandmother's surgery was a success. I stayed with her in Boston for a month, and Kaylin drove up almost every day, bringing her favorite pastries and fresh flowers. On the day we returned to New York, we passed through Rhode Island, and my grandmother suddenly said she wanted to see the coastal mansions in Newport. I came here with your grandfather when we were young, she smiled. I've never forgotten it. Newport's waterfront estates are famous across America, Gilded Age mansions now mostly open to the public. We stopped outside the iconic Breakers mansion, and my grandmother sighed, to live in a house like this would be the dream of a lifetime. Kaylin smiled, it's not that special, really. The layout's not as cozy as a small apartment. His tone was so casual, as if he knew the place intimately. Just as we were about to leave, an elderly man in a crisp suit hurried over and bowed respectfully to Kaylin. Mr. Voss, what a pleasant surprise. Shall I show you around? Kaylin froze for a split second, then waved it off. No need, Harper. I'm just here with friends. The butler's gaze swept over us, his smile warm. Of course, sir. Please let me know if you need anything. After he left, my grandmother asked curiously, do you know the butler here? Kaylin's eyes flickered, and he forced a smile. I translated the estate owner's family biography a while back, met him a few times. I stared at his stiff profile, my doubts growing. The butler's deference was not that of someone speaking to a mere translator. Back in New York, I couldn't help but investigate Kaylin secretly. I searched Brooklyn College's faculty directory, no sign of him. I asked friends to inquire about recent Cornell graduates named Kaylin Voss, nothing. I even visited his apartment, only for a neighbor to tell me it had been vacant for 6 months. But the most devastating blow came when I found his photo on the cover of an old financial magazine, headlined, Voss Group Heir, Marcus Voss's son Kaylin expands his business empire. In the picture, he wore a tailored suit, his eyes sharp and commanding, a world away from the poor scholar I knew. My world spun. I'd been living in a carefully constructed lie. I began avoiding him, hanging up his calls, having colleagues tell him I was too busy when he asked to meet. Until one day, he showed up at my apartment building, soaked to the bone, clearly having rushed through the rain. Why are you avoiding me? He asked, his eyes filled with hurt and confusion. Is it because of what happened in Newport? I looked at him, all my pent-up emotions erupting. Kaylin, who are you really? You're not a college teacher, and you don't live in Williamsburg. You're the heir to the Voss Group, you're a billionaire. Yet you stood with me haggling at flea markets, watching me stress over $30,000 like it was a fortune. Did you think it was funny? Watching me pour my heart out to you like a fool. I threw the magazine at him, tears streaming. You lied to me from the start. Was every word, every gesture just part of some game? He turned pale as a sheet, picking up the magazine, his lips trembling. I didn't mean to lie to you for so long. I just didn't want my identity to ruin what we had. Ruin what we had? I scoffed. Our relationship was built on lies. You never trusted me. You thought if I knew you were rich, I'd become greedy and calculating, didn't you? He reached out to touch me, but I stepped back sharply. Don't touch me, Kaylin. It's over between us. I turned and ran into the building, leaving him calling my name over and over, his voice hoarse with tears, but I didn't look back. That night, I locked myself in my room and cried until dawn. I wasn't angry that he was wealthy, I was angry at the deception, at him treating my sincerity like a toy to be manipulated. Over the next year, I changed jobs, moved to the other side of Queens, and cut off all contact with Kaylin. I threw myself into my work, pouring every ounce of energy into my designs. With several successful projects, I made a name for myself in the industry and gradually began to heal. But every time I passed the Brooklyn Bridge and saw the flea market stalls, a sharp pain would twist in my chest. I thought I'd never see Kaylin again, until an industry summit. I was invited as an emerging designer, only to discover the event was hosted by a Voss Group subsidiary. When the host introduced Kaylin Voss, CEO of Voss Group, I froze. He looked thinner than I remembered, exhaustion etched in his eyes, yet still stood out as the most commanding presence in the room. He saw me too, his eyes lighting up for a moment before darkening with deep remorse. After the summit, his tone humble, "Elena, it's been a long time. How have you been?" I nodded coldly. "Mr. Voss, is there something you need?" "I'm in a hurry." "I know I hurt you deeply," he said urgently. "I've regretted it every single day this past year. I shouldn't have lied to you, and I shouldn't have doubted your intentions. I've resigned as CEO of Voss Group, donated most of my shares to charity, and kept only enough to get by. I got a real job teaching comparative literature at Brooklyn College, and I'm living in that same Williamsburg walk-up, bought it, actually." I stared at him in shock, never imagining he'd go to such lengths. "I don't want to intrude on your life," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, sincere and pained. "I just needed to tell you, I've become the person I pretended to be. I'm no longer the Voss Group heir, just a regular college professor. I know I hurt you beyond words, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that my feelings for you were real, and my desire for a simple life with you was too." In the months that followed, he embarked on the most awkward, heartfelt pursuit. He'd wait outside my office after work, holding my favorite latte, but only dare to watch from a distance. He'd visit my usual bookstore, buy the books he knew I wanted, and slip them into my desk drawer. In his Brooklyn College classes, he'd use my designs as examples, telling his students proudly, "This is work by the most talented designer I know." Once, I stayed late overtime during a downpour. As I stared out at the rain, remembering that cold, rainy night a year earlier, I prepared to hail a taxi, when a familiar pair of worn Converse appeared in my line of sight. It was Kaylin, holding a large umbrella and the wool blanket I'd never returned. "I know you don't want to see me," he said, his voice low. "But the rain's too heavy. Let me drive you home." We didn't speak the entire way. When we reached my apartment building, he handed me the umbrella. "Take it, don't catch a cold." Looking at him, soaked to the skin, the ice around my heart cracked. "Kaylin," I said softly. "You don't have to do this." He managed a bitter smile. "I know. But I owe you. I'd spend the rest of my life making it up to you if I had to, even if you never forgive me." What finally melted my resolve was my grandmother's birthday. I took her to a restaurant for dinner, only to spot Kaylin. He was wearing that same faded shirt, working as a part-time waiter, having quit his teaching job to truly experience ordinary life, supporting himself with odd jobs and translation work. My grandmother recognized him and smiled. "Dear boy, thank you for helping me when I was sick. Elena's stubborn, she's been thinking about you all this time." Kaylin froze, his eyes widening with surprise and disbelief. That night, we sat in a corner of the restaurant and talked for hours. He told me about his childhood, growing up in the cutthroat world of business, his parents' divorce, never having a true friend, surrounded by people who only cared about his status and wealth. That's why he'd run away, desperate to find someone who loved him for himself, not his money. When he met me, he'd grown so afraid of losing me that he'd made a terrible mistake, clinging to lies to keep our relationship intact. "I'm sorry, Elena," he said, taking my hand, his calloused palms still warm and familiar. I know, I'm sorry, doesn't fix anything, but I truly am. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want a chance to be with you, to be honest with you, and live the life we both wanted. Looking into his sincere, weary eyes, I thought of his persistence over the past year, his willingness to change. I realized I'd never truly forgotten him. What I loved was the man who'd haggled for me at flea markets, picked me up in the middle of the night, and given up everything for me, whether he was a billionaire or a nobody. Kalen, I said, squeezing his hand gently. I forgive you. But this isn't the end, it's a new beginning. We start over, with honesty and trust this time. His eyes filled with tears, and he pulled me into a tight embrace, as if he never wanted to let go. Thank you, Elena. Thank you for giving me a second chance. His voice cracked with relief and gratitude. A year later, we got married at the Brooklyn Bridge flea market. He wore that same faded indigo work shirt, I wore a wedding dress I'd designed myself, and our small group of guests included my grandmother and a few close friends. The vendors cheered and offered their congratulations, and the vintage camera seller laughed. Never thought my little stall would play matchmaker for such a lovely couple. Our married life is simple and warm. We live in that Williamsburg walk-up, he continues his translation work, and I focus on my designs. He still accompanies me to flea markets to haggle, and I brew him instant coffee when he works late into the night, just like when we first met. Occasionally, we'll visit the Newport mansion, not as heirs, but as tourists, watching the sunrise over the ocean together. Once, as I leaned against him, watching the moonlight through the window, I smiled and asked, "Do you ever regret giving up billions for this ordinary life?" He kissed my forehead, his eyes soft but unwavering, not for a second. Home is wherever you are. Wealth and status don't matter, not when I get to live a life of honesty, freedom, and love with you. The streets of Brooklyn are still bustling, the flea market vendors still haggling, and the subways still packed with people chasing their dreams. Our story began with a lie, twisted through heartache and betrayal, but finally found its way to happiness, rooted in honesty and trust. I've come to understand that the most beautiful love isn't free of deception or hurt. It's about choosing to believe in each other, to change for each other, and to cherish that initial spark for a lifetime, no matter what. And Kaylin and I? We've done just that.